Hello and welcome to the Blues Kind Show, the show for kind blues. So, today I wanted to have a chat about Carlton's leadership profile going into 2026. The majority of the video is going to be about the leadership group and some changes that I think that we should make, but in addition to that, also I'll be predicting what I think the leadership group will probably end up being. The reason I want to talk about this is because I think that we can see a lot of the issues that sort of have plagued the group for a while now, in fairness, but they were very, very obvious at the back end of 2024 and for most of 2025. Issues like inconsistency from week to week, quarter to quarter, blowing leads, resorting to tactics like, dump kicking and blazing away. I think those are all indications of a team that lacks on-field leadership. And a lot of the preparation you do for your on-field leadership is actually done away. It's done during training, it's done in meetings, deciding on standards, who's going to, handle certain portfolios. If there's an issue, who's going to have that sort of restorative chat with people, those sorts of things. And I think it's an area that we've needed to get better, but I think that we probably have. So I wanted to look at the moves that we've made off-field, like I mentioned, most of this is going to be about my thoughts of what the leadership group for 2026 should look like. And this is going to be done a little bit by looking at some of the other, I would say, more well-run teams in the league. Bit of housekeeping first. If you like what I'm doing, or even if you don't, frankly, but if you like what I'm doing, please leave me a comment, a like, a subscribe. It really helps me get out there a little bit more, and I'm very grateful for all the support that I've received. I've only been doing this a short time, and, my videos I think are doing quite well at the minute, so it'd be lovely to see more likes, more engagement, more subscribers. The other thing is, on my last video, I had a few comments saying that my mic volume was too low. I think I fixed it. Let me know in the comments. That sort of feedback really helps me to make a bit of a better show. So, without further ado, let's get into it. In terms of improving leadership, I think bringing Graham right in is a really strong move. I know, scorching hot take. In this first little bit, I'm not going to say anything that I don't think, 90+% of Carlton people agree with. So I'll keep it fairly brief. He's taken over from Brian Cook, who from all accounts was excellent, not just prior to coming to Carlton, but also in his time at Carlton. So I think it means that we don't have a dip at the CEO level. And I suppose my hope would be, because Graham's going to be around for a while, presumably, he can kind of grow into the role and maybe take it to a level beyond maybe where Brian Cook was intending, because Brian was always coming over with a short tenure in mind. So look, at the minimum, we haven't had a step back. Everyone speaks really highly of Graham, so excellent work there. The next guy I wanted to touch on briefly was Chris Davies, because he's replaced an area of the club that was rumoured to be a little bit of a weakness. He replaced Brad Lloyd as the head of footy, and while I've been really impressed with how Brad Lloyd has handled himself in the media since moving on from the club, Chris Davies comes in really highly regarded. For all the journalists that I like and dislike, I'm yet to hear any of them say a bad word about him. And so I think if everyone on every side of the aisle is sort of in consensus that he's, very good at his job, despite a bit of misgivings maybe about Port, I don't think he was the issue with Port Adelaide. So I think that he's been really, really excellent. I just want to say, as a quick side note, the reason I've been impressed with Brad Lloyd is basically because he hasn't scuttered us in the media. I heard him on SEN the other morning, and he was awfully conciliatory, which I thought was quite nice. So I'm not saying he's impressed me like, oh, wow, should we get this guy back? No, we should not get this guy back. But look, good on him. I think he's shown a lot of class when other people maybe go a different avenue. But with that said, one sort of addendum to Chris Davies coming in is he might have been influential in getting the gentleman in the middle of the photo to that side, Travis Boak. He's coming in an off-field role focused on leadership and culture. This is a person who's was still playing to age 37, played 387 games. He's the games record holder of Port, captain for 6 years, 3-time All-Australian, 2-time best and fairest. Excellent, excellent player, but from all accounts, a super professional guy. As a person who I would imagine his role will somewhat be a conduit between the coaches and the playing group, potentially also having a direct sort of connection to the leadership group itself, I think he's an awesome get. He's been in roles like that as a player, and how seriously he took his career from all accounts. It's the sort of guy you would want around to help maintain standards within the group. We've seen guys like Nick Maxwell take up a similar role after their playing career had ended, and apparently to really good effect. In terms of improving standards at the club, I think this is an awesome guy to have on board. So he's not coming in as an assistant coach or anything, too senior in his role, but in terms of being a recently retired player who has a lot of credibility, I think he will be excellent in terms of providing that sort of softer middleman sort of approach instead of it needing to come from Vossi all the time or from the line coaches. It can be a guy like Boki who's got a tremendous amount of experience, is really well regarded, but in addition to that, he practices what he preaches, trains really hard, has got the most out of himself. So I think, again, just an excellent pickup. Before we get into maybe where I think we could go with our leadership group for next year, I wanted to touch on what it looked like this year. So this year, our leadership group was captained by Patrick Cripps, and the other three gentlemen, Walshy, Wiedering and Charlie Curto, were all vice captains. My thoughts on the 2025 leadership group, I felt this year, I don't know if we put too much on Cripper because he's been able to deal with it before, but it was probably too much for Cripper when you take into account that in addition to the massive sort of burden that we've put on him in the past, he also had to deal with the team being unexpectedly unsuccessful. I think it's one thing to be in a leadership position when you know things are probably not going to be very good. But to start the season zip 4 and then with how it went on to finish, I think that was a really difficult spot for him. And honestly, for a guy in the 7th year of his captaincy, it's probably a bit unfair because he's done a hell of a lot of the hard yards. I feel in the past we have wanted to sort of decentralize the burden on him, which is what you should do. It's a team sport with now 23 full-time players, meaning no sub. You can't just rely on one guy to drag us along, both in terms of playing and leadership. And frankly, he's had to do both of them, for the majority of his career. So I'm not saying I don't think he did a good job. I feel we did not help and support Cripper enough. Both Wiedering and Cripper in different media segments acknowledge that the leaders let the group down, which despite me just saying I think the club more broadly let Cripper down, I think this shows excellent leadership. Cripper said it in his BNF address last week. Not last week, I did a video on it last week, a couple of weeks ago. And in late August this year, Wieders was on SEN, and in amongst a number of things that he said, one thing he said about the leaders of the club was, the responsibility was on us and has been on us to lead the way both in action and through words on and off the field. At times we've fallen away this year and not been able to do that successfully. We'll go to work on ourselves and have those conversations about our own leadership, what's worked, what hasn't, and how we can improve each other and move forward. So I think that it's very consistent with a lot of what's sort of come out of the club in recent times, which is, putting the hand up, acknowledging where you've fallen a bit short, and then getting on with how you actually improve instead of sort of wallowing. Just give me half a tick. I need to make sure that my charge is actually going. We all know I like doing things in one take, so yeah, apologies for that, but thank you for bearing with me. So just to pick it up though, so I know some people don't like hearing things like this. I think they almost think it's a sign of weakness to be able to acknowledge, when you've fallen short, and if you do acknowledge that you've fallen short, that you should get fired from your gig. Well, I think that that's a bit overreactive, a bit hysterical, frankly. I would much rather a leader that puts their hand up and said, yeah, I didn't make the mark. I'm going to do, like I would ask you to do better, I'm going to ask myself to do better. And, I'm sure that they would also take feedback from the rest of the players on, how can we help the group better? How can we lead better? What does the group really need from us? So personally, I really appreciate that. One legitimate reason, not an excuse, but an actual reason that our leadership probably suffered a little bit was how much footy Sam Walsh missed. His last game before his long injury was in round 14, against Essendon. He had like 30-something touches. He was absolutely dominant. He then didn't play again until round 24, so he missed 10 games in a row. Now, our season it had a bit of a pulse at that time. I wouldn't say we were in great shape, but, I think we were about 50-50 in terms of wins and losses. I think we were like 6-7 or something. So we were still in the hunt. The week after he goes out, we played the Eagles, and while we won, it was an awful game. We dominated the first quarter and then pretty much did nothing for the next three. And we followed those up with probably the worst game of the year for mine was how we lost to North Melbourne, because we were so clearly better when we, let things go a bit in the last quarter, loosened up, played with a bit more freedom. But in the first three quarters, they handed it to us. It was honestly embarrassing. And then also through that stretch, we had beltings at the hands of the Pies, the Lions and Hawthorn. And I know that they're all top 8 teams, but those games were not even really competitive. They weren't close at all. So this is where I feel having such a small leadership group, but also just such a lacking of leadership density, of depth, can make you really vulnerable when a guy like Walshy goes out of the team. Finally, because I'm about to talk about Charlie Curnow, slight trigger warning, but then also I'm going to keep this brief because we don't do massive rinsings on this show. We try to keep it somewhat classy. I'll make it brief. I think the number of fans who think Charlie led well this year would absolutely be in the margins. To be honest, I was never a fan that he was voted into our leadership group. I've never really seen him as a great leader. And therefore him now being out of the leadership group, I don't necessarily view as a bad thing. I don't think it was ever a good selection, but it was voted on by his peers, so be it. If they regard him as a good leader, fair enough. They probably know a lot of things that I don't know about him. But in terms of his, how do I put this? His level of observable effort on the ground this year, I thought was pretty poor. I think the fact that guys like Matthew Lloyd and Gary Lyon got stuck into him halfway through the season was quite telling, because I feel like a lot of those guys tend to just like other key forwards because that's the position that they largely played. But no, they lined him up and knocked him down. So personally, I think the fact that, you're missing Walsh, too much is being asked of Cripper yet again, and we've got a guy like Weeders who said he wasn't leading as well as he'd like, but at least he's put his hand up, and then a guy like Charlie who wasn't up to standard as far as I'm concerned. There's some reasons why maybe the leadership didn't go as well as it could have this year. So what I wanted to do was have a look at how other clubs do it, especially ones that I think are really well led. And so I've decided to look at Brisbane, Collingwood, Geelong, Hawthorn, and the Suns. Who would have thought that I'd be saying that the Suns are a well-led club, but this year they were, so I'm going to give them their flowers. Omitted Adelaide, you went out in straight sets. Not happening. Obviously, they were the minor premier, but no. Fremantle, a little bit the same, although I don't mind them so much. So this was the 5 that I decided to settle on. So, Brisbane Lions have a leadership group of 9 people in total, including co-captains Lockie Neal and Harris Andrews, vice-captains Hugh McLuggage and Josh Dunkley. You can see the remaining leaders in the leaders category. Collingwood, 7 leaders. I'm not going to read through all the names for all the clubs. You can see them there. But notable absences for Collingwood. So despite having 7 leaders, Steele Sidebottom and Scott Pendlebury are both not in their leadership group. At least they weren't this year. Geelong, the smallest, well, equal smallest leadership group from this sort of a group, with just Danger and Tom Stewart. But I wanted to note, Geelong famously has a lot of institutional stability. So, Chris Scott's been there forever. Guys like Nigel Lappin have been there forever. And Andrew Mackey, there's a lot of guys sort of around the peripheries of the club that are really highly regarded. And I think that helps them out a lot. In addition, following on from Geelong though, we've got Hawthorn. Again, only a 2-person leadership group, but I think it's really worth noting that there's a lot of very experienced guys like Gunston, Bruce and Blake Hardwick who have been there for a while who are not named. And then other top-line players like Jai Newcomb, Josh Battle and Tom Barrass. So while there's only 2 people, based on the sort of count that I just went through, there's really 8 people that I think you could very reasonably say, if they're not formal leaders, because they're literally not formally appointed as leaders, they would be the sort of, next level of guys that would provide on-field leadership. So it's that sort of point that I was going to before of, you need that sort of density, and even though they don't formally have a big leadership group, it's not hard to go through their list and find guys that are strong leaders, based on their history, either with their club or at other clubs in the case of Battle and Barrass. And then finally, Gold Coast, captained by Noah Anderson, 6 leaders in total. But again, a notable, Jared Witts, who is formerly a co-captain of the Suns, was not named. So again, I would sort of count it as, 7, maybe more if you really wanted to go through the list in detail. So with the exception of Geelong and Hawthorn, they all have at least 6, with most clubs having players who are obviously leaders, but not in their group. So again, guys like Jared Witts. So, actually, I'll just skip over that bit. I'd be guessing that if I was trying to guess which players at each club do the most in terms of leadership outside of the captains and vice captains, I probably wouldn't have a great idea. I don't think most people do. It's one of those ones like assistant coaches that who knows exactly what they're doing behind closed doors. But just sort of looking at these different groups, what I think the makeup of each group sort of indicates is sort of 2 main things. Who you pick to round out the leadership group, their absolute leadership credentials are probably not the most important thing. And what I mean by that is, when you look at guys like, say, Jamie Elliott, Charlie Cameron, and Will Powell, I'm sure they do have some good leadership groups, but I think these are guys who are more, maybe exceptional for other reasons. So, for example, Will Powell plays a absurdly tough brand of football. Like, he's fearless. So I think he'd be an excellent person to have as a leader because of how he leads by example. Charlie Cameron and Jamie Elliott, I think one aspect of leadership that they both do really well is they take responsibility for finishing chains of play. Like, they're forwards who are happy to take tough shots. I think that actually does take some amount of leadership of, one thing that we've bemoaned is lacking people that want to take responsibility, put the team on their back. And that's something that those 2 sorts of guys do. I don't think that maybe the 3 players I've chosen examples maybe do all this sort of stuff in terms of on-field communication, organising teammates, pushing training standards, all of that sort of stuff. But they're at the end of the leadership bench, if you will, and they provide a lot in a different way. So again, I can't say with certainty who are necessarily the greatest classical leaders on each team, but that's what it sort of seems like to me, is that you have your first, couple of guys who are dyed-in-the-wool proper leaders, and then other guys who just provide, different complementary elements. The other thing that I thought was an obvious takeaway is that, like I mentioned, the term leadership density is so buzzwordy, but I think it actually makes a lot of sense. Density is important. This is where I think we probably lacked the most last year. Our top end leaders in terms of Cripps, Waiters, and Walsh all seem to do a good job, especially when they're actually available. But beyond that, maybe we haven't had those sorts of complementary pieces. I think increasing our leadership group size would really help, because even if certain guys are already informally doing things, having it formalized would give more structure. So, for example, young players would know who they need to turn to, and also, when more guys at the end of the leadership bench start attending meetings, then we will have a greater understanding of what role is delegated to who. If there's an issue with a young forward, who should take care of it? If there's an issue with, structure in the back line, who can take care of it? Because one, it means that not every single thing needs to fall to Waiters. Let's take the example of an extra leader in the back line. Instead of everything needing to fall to Waiters in the back line, he can handle some things, but then this other leader that I'll get into shortly might be able to handle a bit more. And so, you can decentralize a bit, you can delegate better, and have it more clear about who is responsible for what, which I think, as we're trying to develop our leadership capabilities, would go a long way. So, with all of that said, here's my proposed leadership group for 2026. Please be nice. So, Captain, Jacob Wiedering, Vice Captains of Sam Walsh and George Hewitt, and then to round out the leadership group, I would go a bit bananas, in fairness, but hey, it's still 8 people, which is one fewer than Brisbane, so I'm taking it. Nick Haynes, Mark Petnett, Zach Williams, Ollie Hollins, and Harry Mackay. First things first, guys, I know I don't have Patrick Cripps. I know I don't want any comments about me not having Patrick Cripps of like, oh, hey, BKS, did you know you don't? No, yes, I know. I'm very aware. I don't want anyone to think I've forgotten. But here are my reasons for leaving him out. I look at teams like the Pies and the Suns. Both of them have previous captains left out entirely of their leadership group. He's been the captain, Cripper, since 2019, so 7 seasons. I feel now would be a good time for him to hand over to refresh the leadership, because one, it seems that the club is going in a different direction, so it's sometimes nice to have a very clear break, a clear line of demarcation, but also, this is obviously, my opinion is not a reflection on how I think Cripps has been as a captain. I think he's easily our best captain since Stephen Kernahan. I don't think it's even close. So, from the year 2000 odd to now, Cripps has clearly been our best captain. I am not shading or slighting him at all. But what I think is that it has 2 possible benefits. One, he's going to be 31 next year. I think he probably has 3 to 5 years of peak football left. This might help to either extend his career or at least just get the most out of it, where he doesn't have to focus on as many meetings and all that sort of stuff. Like, we've seen a guy like Scott Pendlebury play to, I don't even know what age he is, 38, something like that. I think in part it's because he handed over the captaincy and he's been able just to focus more on himself. And if we want to get the most out of Cripps' remaining years while he's still an elite player, I think this would be a good thing. The other thing is, moving on from him might help the group, because they would potentially be in a better position to realise the amount of burden that they should have already picked up from Cripper. Sometimes giving people additional responsibility, even if they're not ready for it yet, can help them, because they can grow into it once the penny sort of drops. There is a little bit of a risk associated with this, but I think it's probably worth doing. And look, frankly, Cripps is always going to be a leader while he plays for Carlton. I bet if we win a flag, like Dane Zorko got up on the stage in 2024, Cripper will be there to pick the thing up. If, we were to go this way and not have him as our captain and we end up winning a flag, I think it's a bit sad, because the guy deserves to be a premiership captain of our club, given everything he's given to us. Like, that's almost something that I feel like we should be trying to give back to him. But if timing doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And if we can, I'm sure him, like every Carlton fan on the face of the earth, if they had to choose between being a premiership player but not getting to be the captain of it, or just being the captain forever and never winning a flag, he would just choose the premiership. I know that's what I would prefer, and it's really the only thing missing from his resume. So just wanted to start there. Massive, massive kudos to everything that Cripper has done for us, especially as captain. This is not a slight on him. So, now that we've done the notable absences, let's move on. King Weeders reigns supreme. I don't think many would argue that Weeders is capable and worthy of being a captain. What I think the argument is more likely to be from people is that they think it should be Sam Walsh instead. And I think that that's completely valid and legitimate. I don't disagree with that at all, but there's one big difference between the two for mine. Weeders is contracted long term, Walsh isn't. End of. I really like Walsh. If he decides, as an early Christmas present to the baggers that he wants to sign on for a 10-year deal or something, that'd be, especially taking a bit of unders, that'd be awfully nice of him. What a nice guy. But if that's the case, then I'd have no problems if he was a co-captain with Weeders, or even if he was just the outright captain. Obviously, when selecting my team, I can make one selection as to what I think it's going to look like, so I can't both have, formats of Weeders is the captain and he isn't, and Walsh is the captain and he's the co-captain. You know what I mean? This is my one crack at it, and this is what we've gone with. That doesn't mean I'd be disappointed if other combinations occurred. So, look, if Walsh decides to sign long-term soon, I'd be more than happy for him to be a co-captain next year. As it stands, though, vice-captain I think is awfully appropriate, and then the other element of that is, like I said in my last video, George Hewitt is the exact sort of player that I think that could help to build our leadership capability, because he, from all accounts, is so hardworking. He's gone from like a half-back / tagger at Sydney, coming to us on a reasonably modest deal, to a BNF winner and a really, really good midfielder. In terms of guys that I think that could sort of step up in terms of what they're giving to the club in terms of formal leadership, I think his game's in great order, and he's the exact sort of guy. I think I might have mentioned in my last video, if guys like Cooper Lord and Jagger Smith are following George Hewitt around the track, I got great faith that they're going to learn a lot of good traits. So I would go ahead and make George a vice-captain in addition to Walshy. Then there's a couple of other additions. So the reason why I've gone for all these guys is I think they will all feature regularly next year, and apart from Ollie Hollands, they're all at least 27. So they've all demonstrated their commitment to the group. All of the ones who can be signed long-term are signed long-term, and then there's a couple of older boys which, they're never going to get super long deals. So I'll just quickly go through them now. So Harry, despite all the media nonsense around him, he has never said that he wants to leave. I've even heard a bunch of journalists say that Harry's never wanted to go anywhere, that it's basically been external noise trying to push him out the door so that we would trade him and keep Charlie. I'm glad that never happened. Harry's always been really public about his love for the club, and just watching him, I think that it's obvious how much he cares. He's a senior player, one of our elite talents, I think, in terms of him just replacing Charlie in the leadership group. So we have a leader in the forward line. Great. Nick Haynes next. Came fourth in our BNF, super selfless player, has happily played out of position, which is more than what can be said for a couple of other players this year. Apparently ultra professional, and again, sort of like with George Hewitt with Jagger Smith, I think he'd be an awesome mentor for young guys like Harry Dean when he comes in. So I wanted someone like Nick Haynes for that example that I sort of mentioned earlier, where if Wiedering and Haynes are in the same team and they're both formally appointed as leaders, instead of just having Wiedering as the sole leader in the back line who has to do everything, now they can sort of delegate a bit better, divide and conquer with their responsibilities. And so, Wieders knows what he needs to do. Haynes can pick up a little bit of the slack, which I think would be excellent. Just wanted to note, this sort of role could definitely be filled by someone like Nick Newman, but I went with Hainesy basically because Nick Newman missed all of last year with an injury. I would rather that a guy like Nick Newman just gets his football going again instead of worrying about leadership stuff. Mark Pittonet. If Mark Pittonet was a better player, and I'm not saying he's not good, but I mean if he was like a gun, I think he could be in consideration for vice captain. He's really heavily involved with the club in a lot of different facets. So he does a lot of work with Carlton Respects, which, I mean, anyone who's followed me for half a minute, I'm sure you could predict that that's the sort of thing that I would like. And he also helps out with the VFL team. I went to a number of VFL games this year, and there was times where he wasn't playing, where he would still go down and coach, give advice to players. You know, the VFL boys would be asking him things, and he was so willing and happy to help out. I think he also plays in a very strong manner. Like, I think he plays with a lot of presence. And so, at the bare minimum, he's the sort of guy that leads really well by examples and through his interaction. So I think he'd be an excellent choice. Zach Williams might be probably the most, I guess, controversial of the people that I've picked. But this, to me, is sort of a pick in the similar vein to the guys I mentioned before, like Jamie Elliott, Charlie Cameron, and Will Powell. He seems very popular among the playing group. I believe that he's looked up to as a senior figure, both with our small forwards and also our Indigenous players. So guys like Moya, Motlop, Flynn, Young, Will White, which, not the Indigenous players, the small forwards is an area that we have struggled. And so some extra leadership in that area, I think, would be a good idea. Because I've sort of brought him up in the similar vein of how I was talking about guys like Jamie Elliott, I don't know if Zach would make the greatest captain of all time, but as a guy who you could give a little bit more responsibility, so that maybe his role extends, you know, to organising the other players on the ground, bringing energy, you know, pep talks, you know, if a guy misses a goal and they're really down, you know, getting around them, those sorts of things that might seem quite small but can really help with team cohesion. I think given his age and standing in the group, he would be a great choice. It also would put another leader in the forward line next to Harry Mackay, and I think that could go a long way to sort of helping each other. They could lean on each other a bit, because I don't think either of them are necessarily absolutely natural leaders. But there's no dispute, we need leadership in the forward line, and I think given sort of their age, their complementary skill set, and then also just their general demeanour and personalities, they seem to have really good temperaments. I think they'd be really good choices just as leaders at the club. Just as a quick aside, this sort of role again could be filled by someone like Ben Ainsworth or Will Hayward, but as they're new to the club, I thought Zach Williams was probably the better choice. Finally, Ollie Hollands. I've said this a bunch of times. I'm super impressed with this guy. He's a third-year player who grows his game every year, and while I don't know if he will ever be the captain of the club or anything like that, of our players under 22, I think he is the one who has shown the most maturity and readiness to be in the leadership group. I think his game is clearly in the best order of any of those younger guys. And again, given he plays on multiple lines, yeah, super selfless. I remember seeing him get lined up at half forward this year. It drove me mad. He is not a half forward. But the point is, he does things for the team that he's asked to do, seemingly without a complaint. He dealt with all of this year despite the stuff going on with his brother. I think that in terms of bringing in an extra guy who's younger, because I mean, Sam Walsh is like 25 next year. Not saying he's super old, but I think it would be good to have someone who's a little bit younger to start coming through. So then in, say, 3 to 5 years, when a lot of these players have aged out, you do have a little bit more of that ready depth of leadership. So, a bit of fun. This was my take on what I think the leadership group is going to look like next year. But this is my prediction as to what Carlton will actually do. I think they will stick with Cripps as the captain, stick with Wieders and Walshy as the vice-captains, and then add Mackay in as a replacement for Charlie, and bring George Hewitt in as well for a little bit of extra depth. It's more conservative than my approach to it. But again, these are just predictions at this time. Based on the fact that we went with the same leadership group 2 years in a row, I'd kind of expect that if we're going to change it, it's not going to be a massive shake-up. I obviously think we would benefit a little bit more by a more substantial shake-up. But yep, as you can see here, this is what I am expecting us to go with, whereas the masterpiece that I hope we go with is this. Molto bene. I think I'm going to leave it there. 35 minutes in seems like a good time. If you like what I'm doing, please give me a like or a subscribe. If you want to engage, push back, agree, disagree, give me some ideas, please feel free to leave a comment. If you want to contact me for any reason, my email is blueskindshow@gmail.com. It's also in the bio of the channel. And if you have your own ideas for what the leadership group could look like, feel free to put it in the comments as well, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks everyone for watching as usual, but as always, go Blues!